Oh hey, welcome back. If you're here from the first video, thanks for watching. If this is your first time, welcome. See me almost eat shit up there? Climbing a real mountain's kind of tough. I say today we just focus on a fake mountain. Climb that with some friends. And as long as I got you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel like letting us know what gets you down in Colorado politics, fill out the digital comment card in the description below. Enjoy the video.
One, go. That was so perfect. Yeah. Okay. Like most things, there are two extremes to what we're going to talk about today. In individualism, you have the one extreme of this rugged, pull yourself up by your bootstraps individualism. On the other side of that, you have complete and utter dependence on other people to support you as just to function as a normal human being. Our job today is going to be to find that sweet middle ground between those two. And I felt like one of the more universal examples that I could come up with would be to share a little bit about my own mental health journey, because individualism was something that I struggled with immensely when starting the road to recovery. So a couple years ago, my mental health issues spiked. And this was frustrating because I was starting college and this was supposed to be like one of the best times of my life, but I had all of these underlying things that I did not know how to deal with, and I didn't have the skills to deal with them. In the US, having grown up in a culture that promotes this rugged individualism, that promotes this expectation that you should be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, not rely on anybody for a measure of success, it's a little bit hard to shift that mode of thinking to be able to accept help, especially when you feel like you should be capable of handling it yourself. Additionally, being a young man, I was not aware of the hilarious lack of emotional development and skills that I faced because of the systemic pressures coming from things like the patriarchy. So you have this US pressure of rugged individualism on you. You've got the patriarchal systemic pressure of not really being in a culture that helps young men develop these skills to emotionally regulate themselves. And you have the kind of ego that comes with being a young person and believing that you can grit your way through any problem. What followed was this exponential increase in pain and struggle as I attempted to battle this completely alone and unprepared. The way I think about it is it's like if you showed up to an old-fashioned duel with pajamas and popcorn rather than a dueling sword. Like you're so unaware of what you need to be able to get through this next moment that you're just kind of throwing shit at the wall. So it wasn't until things got like pretty dangerous and out of control that a family member stepped in and talked to me about seeking some professional help. This was laughable to me. So for the next few months, I completely ignored this recommendation. And things obviously got worse. In US culture, there's this notion that we're going to talk about as individualism maxing instead of rugged individualism, just because I want something new to refer to it as. But this culture of individualism maxing is so ingrained into our DNA that it becomes really hard to see outside of that bubble, to see help for what it is. Other people, you hold the expectation that if they're struggling, they should seek help and you'd be willing to provide this help. But for yourself, that expectation can be entirely different. You can believe that you're holding yourself to a higher standard by not seeking help, when in reality you're just creating a little bit more damage than was already initially there. For months I tried to continue and grit my way through this, and things obviously got worse. So this is when I began seeing a psychologist. And it wasn't until I started talking to someone with a professional background in this skill development that I realized how isolated and worn down that I'd become from trying to do this entirely alone. And things obviously got worse. So this is when I began seeing a psychologist. This is when I reached out for help and initially accepted the idea that I might not have the skills to be able to do this by myself. And it wasn't until I started talking to someone with a professional background in this skill development that I realized how isolated and worn down that I'd become from trying to do this entirely alone. So it was this like polarized version of individualism that led me to this complete breakdown of identity. And what kind of shocked me was that leaning on my community to support me led me to this much healthier and stronger middle ground between reliance and independence. So the two extremes here were crash landing on rock bottom because I lacked the tools and skills to help myself. And on the other side, creating this complete and utter dependence on other people to help me through my own issues in my brain. Neither of those options would have led me to the kind of stable, healthy space that I sit now. We're going to play this game with some friends because I attempted this alone and I died twice before reaching the end of the first level. One of my individual skills is not playing video games. Luckily, I have a community that I can lean on so that we can all still have fun together. We're going to play this game with some friends because I attempted this alone and I died twice before reaching the end of the first level. One of my individual skills is not playing video games. Luckily, I have a community that I can lean on so that we can all still have fun together. And the individual skills that we bring are not so consequential. We can kind of rely on each other to get up this mountain. That is not saying that people don't do this by themselves. You should look up some of the speedruns. They're impressive. For my case, lacking the skills that I need to get through this challenge, I'm going to rely on my community to help me through. Okay, while you watch us struggle to make it to the peak, my friends and I, probably me more than them, I want to narrow down and talk about this broad theme with a little bit more specifics. We have that example of the mental health journey, and I want to work off that to talk more about how we find this middle ground between these two extremes, this complete dependency on other people and this complete isolation, rugged individualism. Instead of talking about these two extremes, I want to narrow down on the individualism side of the spectrum. So let's think about it as a coin. Individualism is a coin. On one side, you have capability through individualism. On the other side, you have this toxic, rugged, individualist maxine. On the capability side, I want us to think about a couple things. First is that for a lot of people, me especially, doing things on my own is usually much simpler than coordinating with others. Coordination requires this initial super heavy lift to get everybody on the same page, to go through the steps to find compromise, but coordination often leads to more success. Think about what we talked about in the last video, that diversity of thought and how beneficial that is to a community. We can apply that same principle here. When you are doing things by yourself, yeah, you don't have to worry about groupthink, but in a way you do, because the only thoughts being put forward, the only ideas being put forward are your own. When you decide to coordinate with other people, you are acknowledging that it is going to be a tougher process, but the outcome is probably going to be better than what you could have done by yourself. We should talk about some good examples of individualism, because I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. We're just talking about being able to take care of yourself, for example, being an individual enough to know who your identity is, to make decisions for yourself, to be a moral agent, if you will, the ability to think upon the reasons for acting and choose an action well. Accountability is also a really good perk of individualism, to be able to hold yourself accountable for your own mistakes. It is easier when you are in a group or a coalition or a community to blame failures on others, even if it's an equal part to yourself. However, when you're doing something alone, that accountability has to be taken on by yourself. And I think that that is a good skill to be developing, to be able to be accountable for your actions and to be able to recognize that within yourself rather than having someone else point it out to you. It makes the whole process a little bit similar. The other thing is merit. And merit is also a topic that I want to be careful about discussing, because in the US, it's broadly agreed that we live in a meritocracy where it is seen that the individual labors that you have performed are the sole reason for your success. And I think that that's a dangerous line of thought because it ignores any outside factors. Like, say, you have a government that doesn't provide to you adequate options for housing, food, job security, or any economic opportunity. Your failure might not be a result of a lack of your ability to do something or a lack of your awareness or a fault in your process. There are outside factors that condition that. Like in my example, I talked about as a young man struggling with the idea of asking for help because the patriarchy ingrains in your system that needing help is a weakness. And I think that's the area of merit and individualism that we need to be careful about, because I don't think that that is healthy or true. When we are talking about the best outcomes of individualism, we are talking about the ability to take care of yourself, the ability to take accountability for your actions, and the ability to feel joy in your successes and your individual effort towards a solution. On the other side of that coin, you have rugged individualism. It is so prevalent in US society. Independence is such a core part of national identity in the United States. I want to question the idea that independence equals individualism, because I think that it is perfectly capable for you to have independence of thought and action when you are working in a community space. I think that promoting individualism as an alternative to working in coordination with your community or other groups is also a bit dangerous. There are two harmful aspects of rugged individualism. One is that it promotes a culture of white supremacy, and I know that might be an uncomfortable way to frame it, but I want to explain how that is. One of the pillars of white supremacy is this idea that there is only one right way to do something, or the idea under meritocracy that your failures and successes are only a result of your actions and no outside factors. When we think like this, we ignore things like the United States' 250 years of oppression against people of color. When you have a system built out where generational wealth is the primary way that people are able to jump up in income or in classes, and you have whole groups of people that were not allowed to pass down generational wealth up until very recently, you are going to have factors outside of your control that affect your ability to have success. Someone who comes from a family that's been passing down wealth for 150 years is going to have it different than someone who has had wealth passed down for the last 40 years, for example. The other side of this is it isolates you. And I spoke a little bit about that in my example of mental health. When you believe that your success and your ability to achieve anything in this world is solely upon your shoulders, and that you don't require community coordination and you don't require help and instruction from other people on how to achieve that success, your life becomes extremely lonely. And we talked about the importance of community last week and why putting yourself in a space where you are spending time with other people is beneficial. Doing rugged individualism leaves you in a place where you do not have any of those community benefits. You don't have the ability to build empathy, to build bridges, to build intelligence, because you're not exposing yourself to all of these other people. The last thing that I would like to talk about is mutual aid, because it loops into this broader idea of community, and it certainly loops into the idea of rugged individualism and not having a willingness to ask for help. There is a great quote that I have from my boss, Kate. Kate often says when we're talking about mutual aid, that mutual aid only works if people are as comfortable providing help as they are taking help. And that's something that I struggle with a lot. I have no problem providing help. I have still a horrible time accepting help. I also want to loop it back into that idea of the expectations for others versus yourself. If you have the expectation of other people that when they are suffering and when they are in circumstances where they need help, that they should ask for help and that you'd be willing to provide that help, you have to flip that around on yourself, and you have to make sure that when you're in one of those situations as well, you need to have the ability to recognize that you need help. And even tougher than that, you need to be willing to reach out and ask for help. I would like to repeat the quote one more time because it is not just applicable to mutual aid, it is applicable to how you interact with people in your life. Help only works if people feel as comfortable taking as they are giving. I'd like to thank you for joining me on another wonderful YouTube video. As a reminder, we do have that digital comment card in the description below. I would love for you to fill it out. We can even set up a one-on-one where I buy you coffee and we go and chat about what your work in your community could look like. If you want that to be under New Era, we can do that. If you would like us to connect you to other organizations, we can certainly do that as well. We do not gatekeep around here. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you next month where we have a very special guest. Toodles.